Welcome everyone to our last creative conversation for 2026. Today we're talking about arts and health and healing, what organizations are doing to implement those things, and to get, more community understanding about what arts and healing or arts and health can look like in our own communities. So I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers today, who are Katie and Dale. Oops, I have to pull up one more screen. Totally forgot. All right. Dale Savidge is the executive director of a Greenville-based theater company called, I believe it's Applied Drama Theater, or Applied Theater Company. Yes. And he is also a director, educator, and entrepreneur. He holds a doctorate in English and theater from the University of South Carolina, and he is also a registered drama therapist under the guidelines of the North American Drama Therapy Association. He's created 5 books of writing and art by survivors of substance abuse disorder, sexual exploitation, and with juveniles in a detention center. Savidge has created productions, programs, and companies and travels widely, leading and attending conferences and workshops in locales such as Singapore, New York City, and Puerto Rico. And Katie Hinson Sullivan, she is an arts therapist who has worked in diverse settings, including schools, outpatient clinics, hospitals, and various nonprofits supporting children and adults that impacted by trauma. Before returning to Charleston, she spent 3 years at Rikers Island using art as a tool for healing with incarcerated individuals. She is now the founder and director of MUSC's Arts and Healing, which serves patients, families, and community members across inpatient and outpatient settings, as well as through school and community partnerships. Katie is passionate about growing access to the arts and health and advancing the field of art therapy through education, research, and policy advocacy. So, Katie and Dale, welcome and thank you so much for taking the time today to speak with us. We're so glad that you can join us. Oh, for our participants as well. If you are interested in dropping a question, and we got a lot of questions beforehand, but we do have a Q&A section where you can type in. We'll get to them if possible, hopefully as many as we can. And there are also options for closed captioning that are auto-generated. So apologies if those are not completely clear while we're going through this. So, back to Kitty and Dale. Welcome. I would love to hear just a little bit more about each of you and your work, just to give more of a background for the people that are with us today. We can start with Dale and then we can move to Katie.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it. Um, my work has changed a lot since COVID. Um, well, I guess a lot of things changed after COVID. Prior to COVID, most of the Applied Theater Center work and most of my work was group focused and performance focused. So you referenced in your email the Playback Cafe, which went for like 10 years. And after COVID, it sputtered and died just because of all of the changes that were going on. Uh, Used to do a lot of forum theater as a drama therapist. That has really gone away since COVID. Just the whole landscape changed, and my work became more individual drama therapy and art therapy and expressive arts therapies. So what I do now, group focused, group based, I do the Spectrum Theater Company, which is the theater company for adults with autism. And we're in I think our 16th year of doing theater. Our performance is this Thursday. So we have an annual performance at the end of the season. And this year we're doing a performance called A Time to Laugh. So it's comedy because so much of our work is so serious. And, so do you feel safe? Can you communicate well? Now we just had fun all year. So we're doing musical pieces and stories and um, skits and jokes and a play about magic bananas and crime fighting cats and just lots of fun. Um, I still work with groups at Serenity Place here in Greenville, which is a Phoenix Center program for women in recovery, and at Jasmine Road, which is a really wonderful program for women in recovery from trafficking as well as substance use. And then I do some work in schools. Katie and I were talking about the Pickens County schools where I do some work. And then I spend a couple days a week at a PRTF, the psychiatric facility for kids in foster care. And I do mainly, one of my main roles is substance use counselor for the kids who come in with a history of using chemicals or other kind of addictive behaviors. And then I do a lot of expressive arts therapy with them.
Wow, that's amazing. It's interesting to hear the shifts between now and what y'all were doing in the past during COVID. So I'm excited to learn more about that soon. We'll jump over to Katie, if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself in arts and healing.
Well, where do I begin? So I am a licensed and board certified art therapist. And for those that don't know what art therapy is, it is a profession, whereas I think some people think of art therapy as more of an intervention. I know there are lots of coloring books out there that say or claim that they're art therapy or things of that nature. But art therapy is actually a profession. You have to have a master's to actually practice art therapy. There's a lot that goes into the training. A lot of people also consider it more in the art space, but it is actually more a mental health profession. As Dale was speaking about his work in expressive arts therapy and drama therapy, it's a lot of the training is within the psychotherapy work, and we use creative expression as a tool within that space. So my career has really, Hailey, like you said, has been extremely diverse. I started out doing my internship work when I was in my master's program at a school for children with autism. And then my second year, I was at an HIV/AIDS clinic, and I was able to develop a family therapy program there, which was really powerful and impactful. And then I went on to work for an organization that was for families that have experienced some form of abuse or neglect. So I worked as kind of a case manager / art therapist, which is a lot of how art therapists really start out their career. And then, as Hailey said, I also worked at Rikers Island with the incarcerated for a few years before returning to my hometown in Charleston. But if you think about art therapy in that space, it's pretty powerful tool. It's very unsafe to talk about kind of what you're going through in a jail setting. So the art is a really powerful medium to kind of process what's going on, especially within the group dynamic. I also did some individual session work at Rikers as well. And then fast forward, I think that I was a little burnout after Rikers and just needed some space and needed to be back home. So I ended up back in Charleston, which I'm so glad I did. MUSC actually put out a very cryptic call to build an art program here in the hospital, which I'm so glad I answered, because it's been a dream to build a creative arts therapies program here. And MUSC truly believes in whole person care, which I think creative arts therapies there's a really great place for that. All of our docs and nurses are doing the best to care for the medical needs, but there's also a psychological need for patients and families as well. So we have a pretty robust inpatient program. We have about 7 creative arts therapists. That includes art therapy, music therapy, and dance movement therapy in the hospital, just on the Charleston campus. And then post-COVID, Dale, things really changed. And so we saw a huge uptick in emergency room visits for mental health crises for our youth. So knowing that the best way to provide accessible mental health services is in schools, we started a school-based program here at MUSC. So we started off as a pilot in Charleston, and we have since expanded. We started in 5 schools. We're now up to about 30 schools across the state. So we just started in Pickens last year. We're in the Pd. We're starting in Kershaw in the Midlands soon, among other districts. We're in a total of 7 districts right now, which is really amazing, especially given the amount of art therapists or creative arts therapists in our state. We're trying to pack it in, and the Arts Commission has been so wonderful in helping us grow. But that's also a piece of our program, the school-based work, and then we're also pushing into community organizations as well. So we're all about access in our work here. So we really try to look into grants. We do small pilot programs and community organizations to be able to offer creative arts therapists in the community where people need it the most.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for both like touching on the impact that MUSC has had and the abilities that y'all have had to expand over the past few years, but then also talking about, again, those changes that have happened since COVID. And, while some people are like, we're pretty far removed from what COVID was, we're still, everyone is grappling with all the changes that have happened since then. How are we adjusting? What's working? What isn't working? And since that's something that both of you have touched on, I would really like to hear how each of you identified the changes that needed to happen either organizationally or in a in a clinical setting so that you could continue your practices in the community, but also making sure that those needs for each client are being met. It's a complex question, so I can repeat it if we need to.
Dale, you want to take that one?
Well, yeah, I guess like a lot of people, my work went virtual. So, I set up a amateur studio in my home office and sat at my desk for, it seemed like months. It probably wasn't months. Probably, well, might have been months. It felt like years. Zooming at the detention facility and zooming in the group homes and, zooming here and there and Serenity Place and all these places. And it was so unsatisfying just because, drama therapy is an embodied practice. So it's always in a circle. I mean, you're up and you're moving and you're interacting and there we are frozen on a screen. And the cameras in these facilities would be, up in a corner and I would see small people in the room and it was just so difficult to connect. So when that was, but before COVID, we had maybe half a dozen people working in our organization doing all this performance-based stuff, and they all just went to find things to do. I mean, we had to, all of us did. And so we weren't able to pull all that back together after COVID. So that's why I think a lot of my work turned to more individual, like me doing things rather than doing things with a team of people, which I really miss, but it's what had to happen.
Yeah, that makes
I think
sense.
our end, so the hospital was just essential workers. So a lot of, so if you weren't a nurse or a doc, you kind of couldn't be here. Our resources were also very limited as a health institution as well. So we actually were furloughed for some time, our team was. But during that time, we were making, we had volunteers, so not just music therapists, but musicians, artists. I mean, we were just kind of coming together as a team and creating mindfulness videos or the things that we put on YouTube. So we would send them to docs and they would be able to, they had iPads in the hospital. So a lot of patients could be a part of some kind of virtual experience, although it wasn't live, Dale, which was the hard thing. Because again, creative arts therapies is really much about the connection. A lot of the time, if you're doing group work, individual care as well. But I also think COVID, we keep hearing this term of the loneliness epidemic. I think that coming out of COVID too, I think mental health and the arts and social connection is more important than ever. Like I said, there was a call for organizations to push into schools because the kiddos were really struggling within that isolation. So since COVID, we've been booming in terms of like there being a need. And so that has been really, really incredible to see organizations and individuals recognize that need, and bring the creative arts therapies in as that supportive measure, which has been, again, just really incredible. And so I think it's changed things, but I also think it's opening up conversations about mental health and wellness and all of the needs, not just creative arts therapies, but just arts experience in general. Also, I'm sure many of you have heard about social prescribing. It's happening a lot in the UK. So docs are prescribing or writing scripts literally for people to go to a knitting class or go see their local, theater company or orchestra, because that social connection is so incredibly important. We as a country are kind of skimming the surface there. Hopefully it'll be more of a thing to look at whole person care, but I think we're getting there, which is great. I think the conversations are there.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you start talking about those things of like being involved in the community and having access to in-person things, the first thing that comes to mind for me are resources, whether that is access to a script or being able to get somewhere. If you are doing something more malleable, having those physical things to get that end product, whatever the end product is, completed. So, what are some resources that y'all have used both in person and maybe even virtually to help bridge that gap?
What resources have we used? I feel like creative arts therapists, Dale, we're pretty flexible. Like we make pretty much anything work. I think that's part of creativity, right? I mean, I once had a client that was really overstimulated by art materials, but for some reason gravitated towards this old phone book that was in the room. So we created buildings out of I just let him tear up this phone book, and that was our session. He needed some kind of like sensory activity to where we were like making buildings out of torn paper, and we talked a lot about what the tearing felt like there was so much, like all the beefy stuff was there, and it only took just like an old phone book that was laying in the corner of the room. So I think we are very resourceful when it comes to resources. Virtually, it's definitely a lot harder. I also think that reaching out to your communities and finding that there's a lot of free art experiences around you anywhere you go, or creative arts therapies. For example, in Charleston, we partner with this local organization called Mugs for Moms. And so they focus in on postpartum care. So any mama in the community, no matter what age their kid is, can come in and make ceramics together for a couple weeks, no charge, no nothing. And it's facilitated by an art therapist. So any mama really struggling right after postpartum or right within the midst of postpartum can come in and create a container and leave feeling kind of fulfilled, kind of using those metaphors. But yeah, I think art therapists and artists are so resourceful. And also, if you're overseeing an organization, I just want to call out South Carolina Arts Commission's grants too. And they are so incredible. So many organizations are applying for these grants, and they have artists come in or creative arts therapists come in and provide opportunities and experiences for their consumers, which again is incredible that we have that resource in South Carolina, but just calling that out as well.
Yep, ditto. I'm glad you answered that first because I didn't know how to answer it. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, just in the groups, the biggest resource in a group is the other people in the group, which is
totally.
why it's almost always in a circle, so that the energy is distributed around the whole group. So everyone, like I was this morning, I was in a group, and everyone in the group was talking to everyone else in the group, and I kind of fade into the background sometimes, which is really a good place to be. Um, there's that. Of course, almost everywhere I work alongside talk therapists or CBT therapists, and it's sort of a team. So what I'm able to do and then report on my notes, they're able to take into their sessions or the artifacts that people create. If it's writing a poem or they scripted out a scene or they did a piece of art, goes into the session with their talk therapist. Usually that's their caseworker too. Um, so having that person as I know my limits and I don't practice outside my skill set. And when I bump up against something that I'm like, no, not sure how to deal with this, great. There's another person who doesn't know how to deal with it, a supervisor or even the other therapist. That's a huge resource for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dale, I'm really glad that you brought up talk therapy and how that differs from drama therapy. So, if you would like talk just a little bit more about that, since some people are probably unfamiliar with drama therapy, or maybe it's their first time ever hearing that this is something that's a possibility.
Yeah, well, most people think it's therapy for actors, which is a thing. But I'm going to actually read from the website. So drama therapists are trained through the North American Drama Therapy Association, and they work very hard on a brief definition of what trauma therapy is. And I'm going to read it from the website because I think it's the best way to explain it. Drama therapy is an embodied practice. It's active and experiential. It can provide context for participants to tell their stories, set goals, solve problems, express feelings, or achieve catharsis. Through drama, the depth and breadth of inner experience can be actively explored and interpersonal relationship skills can be enhanced. And that's the best definition of drama therapy. There's so many different ways to practice it, and it is so diverse. Um, and I'm really was never very good at improv when I was doing my theater training. I hated improv. I didn't like to do anything. I didn't have a script in front of me. And this is almost all improv based stuff now. So I've had to completely change my attitude about improv. We do use some scripts from time to time, but it's primarily improvisational. That's
Wow.
that's drama therapy.
Wow, nice. So, like putting it into actual scenarios that people are either going through or have experienced in working through that, either in a group setting or one-on-one.
Yeah, I think talk therapists will often do role plays. I mean, role playing is often a part of their training. I think maybe the difference is that when we are playing a scene, I don't follow it up with an explanation of what it means for them or how to change things in their life, or that's not on my burden to um, provide that kind of didactic sort of context to what they just did. I can usually just let it sit with what they created. They'll process it, and we do process as a group. But the processing may not happen in that moment. It may happen later on. That's another kind of difference, I guess.
Yeah. And like letting it sit, marinate for a second, get all that content that they perceived and how it applies to them and let them interpret it. Yeah, that's really amazing. And then Katie, on your side, working with people inpatient and outpatient, what are like some of the similar ways that you see or that you work with talk therapy versus art therapy, whether that is visual art, music, dance, movement, if you could share about that.
So I think there's different schools of thought for art therapists too. There's art therapists that are really much into art. Creating art is the therapy, and like in getting that to marinate and being in that space. Whereas, there's other theoretical approaches where a lot of it is the processing piece, which I think I'm more in that shop. That is my training. So I use art as a tool, and then it's mostly verbal therapy that is happening in my sessions. I use the art as a jumping off point. For example, the little boy that was tearing just up, the phone book, that can be considered by many of an art piece, or that can just be considered as, this verbal play that we were kind of doing within the session. So I think it's very different based on what art therapists that you really speak to. But many art therapists use art as the jumping off point. So for example, if I'm running a group of 6 students, I would do an opening, get everybody comfortable in the room, and then I would introduce a directive, possibly. And then we would all kind of work on that directive, and then we would all kind of process that piece for probably half of the session. So not all of the session is spent creating art. That verbal piece and connection of the art making and kind of that conceptual piece is really important. Some people aren't there yet, just like Dale said, and that we just sit with that, and it's okay for some clients or students to just hold up their work, and that is a really powerful thing. Also, just to delineate, art therapy is not about making a pretty picture. So again, like a directive is, let's identify a yucky feeling and tear it up and put it back together to kind of reframe it. So obviously I wouldn't say it like that, but that would be kind of the premise of a directive. So it's not going to be a pretty picture at the end of the day if you're really getting like a frustration or something down on a piece of paper, which is a pretty powerful thing. And it feels very good to rip it up sometimes. But so that is just kind of a huge piece. Art therapy is about process, not product. I think that's also just kind of a misconception about art therapy too. Like, oh, this school is doing art therapy, we're going to have an art show at the end. That's probably not the case. A lot of the artwork might go in the trash. A lot of it might be saved and kept safe because it was something that they explored that was a little scary or comfortable, or just something that they don't want to show everybody, that's more personal. So I think there's a lot of similarities in verbal talk therapy and art therapy. We just have this extra tool in our back pocket. And in my opinion, again, I'm just an art therapist and very proud of my profession, but I also think that art therapy allows people to get to a place a lot quicker. So your defenses are down when you're creating art, and when you're improvising off of a feeling or a thought and you're putting it down on paper, you're not thinking, about like the symbolism within that. So if, like, for example, if you tell somebody to draw your family doing something, which is an assessment, then some art therapists do, one person on this side of the page and another person on this side of the page, and there's a huge tree in the middle and there's a splitting that's happening, that might give you a lot of great information. Again, I don't assess artwork to the core. I don't make any assumptions using the artwork, but it's a starting off point for the conversation. So I think the conversation piece is so important, or I see it as something that's very important. But I also love groups where everybody's just together and connecting, and maybe that's just the goal for the day, and it doesn't have to be talking about your feelings or what went well or what was challenging this week. It's just a place to connect with other moms who are going through similar experiences that you are, or just creating space for just people to laugh and be together. So it's, it ranges. I also think music therapy is such a fascinating career. I'm not a music therapist. I do have a video if we wanted to show it. I don't know how I would do that, but music therapists have, a lot of functional goals in their back pocket as well. So in the hospital, they say that a NICU baby that receives music therapy is able to, I might be going off on a tangent here, Hailey, stop me at any moment. But NICU babies that are able to engage in music therapy when they're in the hospital have the ability to be discharged up to 2 weeks earlier, which is huge when it's coming to a NICU baby. And that's, for example, my music therapist was just talking about this case study that she did where she had a baby in the NICU that she was working with, and that baby's heartbeat was really erratic and very high. It was a cardiovascular patient that was, I can't remember the diagnosis, but through meeting that baby's heartbeat with a rhythm and a tone and slowly lowering her rhythm, that baby's heart rate was able to equalize, and that baby was able to eat and sleep right after her sessions. So her doing just a 15-minute session every morning for that baby was able to thrive and get out of the hospital a lot sooner. So there's so many different ways. Verbal therapy, touch is also something with NICU babies that music therapists are trained in. There's, dance movement therapy, which is a whole other career that we have not touched on today, but that's also connecting mind and body and movement and putting language to to some sort of movement. But yeah, so there's so many nuances in all of our different specialties, but yeah, I think it all matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And that situation with the NICU baby having the heart issues, using music therapy to like lower that heart rate, potentially speed up their progress of getting out of the NICU too and being able to go home. That's amazing. And we actually got a question. This segues perfectly into it. We got a question from someone who registered for this that was curious about some of the evidence-based impacts of arts-based therapy and health interactions, or how observing and participating in the arts can affect the brain, whether that's through trauma, health-related issues, anything that y'all are familiar with that you've either experienced as a witness or that you have read about.
Yeah, you want to start that one? There's so much.
Yeah, and the NADTA, the Drama Therapy Organization, tracks all the research. I do not keep up with it, mainly because I just don't have time to do a lot of reading of the research and also do like the continuing education training and stuff like that. I mean, anecdotally, I could talk about it, but I'm sure probably at MUSC, this is something that's more, I'm guessing that's more in line with what you do at MUSC. So I'm going to defer to Katie on that.
There's so much research out there. I mean, not just within the creative arts therapies, there's also a book called Your Brain on Art that I would highly, highly recommend to anybody. There's also a book that just came out. It's called like Art RX, maybe. It was done by someone in the UK, a researcher in the UK that also goes through in-depth research studies about just general arts and the brain and how it impacts. Personally, I just did a study with bone marrow transplant patients, little kiddos, ranging from age 4 to 17. We had a control group and then a group that received, the control group just received physical therapy. And then there was another group that received art therapy prior to their physical therapy. There's a lot of data with bone marrow transplant and getting that patient out of bed and mobile actually leads to a better prognosis. So the thought was, and a lot of BMT patients are very weak and really struggling post-transplant. So the idea was that maybe tending to the mind could allow those patients to be more available. So like bridging them to physical therapy, taking care of their mind and their wellness could allow them to engage better with physical therapy. So we just did that study. We're hashing through all the stats now and really looking at the data, but so far we have found in the art therapy group, those patients were actually able to engage more readily with their physical therapy and actually walked incredibly or like significant distance longer than just the physical therapy group. So hopefully we'll publish something on that soon, but that's just one example of just engaging in art therapy. Like I said, with music therapy, there's a ton of studies. Again, their goals are functional. You can also see like their respiratory rates and their heart rate decrease and all of those things. So babies being discharged from the NICU 2 weeks early is, I think, a huge stat. Also, there was a senator, I think in Indiana, Hubbard, maybe, she was shot in her frontal lobe, I believe. And so she's a huge advocate for music therapy because during her rehabilitation from her traumatic brain injury, she she was doing OT and speech and PT, but once music therapy stepped in and started co-treating with those other therapies, she was able to start really speaking again. And by speaking, I mean singing. So there's a lot of research that says you're able, because there's a rhythm to it, and it's, language is stored in different parts of your brain. This senator was able to sing "This Little Light of Mine" before she was able to say, "Turn the light on." So that is how she got to that point of getting her speech back. There's, gosh, I could talk forever, especially about the about memory care or patients who are declining in that space. Again, because these creative processes, movement, music, art making are stored in different parts of your brain, or they kind of work in different parts of your brain versus that verbal space. Or just that verbal space. People on memory care units, for example, if they have a musician or a music therapist there, they're able to kind of come back, they say, or be present because music or those specific songs are stored in the sensory part. So they're able to kind of have some clarity, maybe talk about a memory during that time, which is really profound, I think. But yeah, again, I could go on and on. If there's a specific population that anybody wants to know about, I'm happy to think about that a little bit too. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought up the memory care and incorporating that with music or art therapy in any aspect. For those of you that are watching that are in Pickens County or the upstate, Dale, you might be familiar with the City of Clemson's Arts Center. They have recently paired with Clemson Downs, which is a senior progressive living community, and they have an art therapy group that meets there. I believe it's weekly or every other week, and it's always the same art therapist. They have actually created a toolkit online that is free for organizations to access so that they can get more information on if they want to do a partnership like that in their community, having some ideas that they can do with an art therapist just from the get-go and some of the impacts that they have seen. It's a really, really interesting process that they've come up with, and I believe they receive funding specifically for that program from the city of Clemson too. So, highly, highly, highly recommend if your organization is interested in doing something around memory loss and art therapy, looking into that toolkit. And I'll send a link to that information in the email after this segment is over. But while we were talking a little bit about those differences and understanding that not everyone has a background in some form of art or acting or music, and that there can potentially be sometimes where people are like, oh, I'm not an artist, or like, oh, I'm not going to be good at acting. I'm not going to make something that's beautiful because I don't identify like that. How do you help the people that you work with overcome that idea that you don't have to be an artist specifically to make art?
Well, I did a poetry writing group this morning at Serenity Place, and without exception, everyone who read their poem began by saying, "This is really terrible. I can't write. No one will like this. This doesn't make any sense." And then, of course, after every one, there were a lot of snaps. And if I'm doing a drawing with someone and they say, "I'm not an artist," it doesn't. I've learned that it doesn't help that much to say you don't have to be an artist because they still think they have to be an artist. But if I draw a stick figure, which is about what I could do, I'm sure Katie would be
Mhm.
shocked at the kind of things I draw. They're so poor, but I'm not a visual. I've never learned to draw. But if I draw a stick figure, something or other, then they go, oh, okay, then it's okay that mine will look better than his because I can do better than a stick figure. So I guess sometimes just demonstrating that you don't have to have skill in an area to use it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so true. I think that for me, I mean, I worked in a jail with incarcerated tough guys. So I think for me, it was like, just humor me. What else do you have to do today? Like, just come hang out with me. Let's create something. And I also, in my initial meeting with people, I don't necessarily bring like a blank sheet of paper and a colored pencil. That is really intimidating, even for me. And I went to art school. I don't know what I'm going to draw. Is this lady going to analyze every little mark that I put on this paper? Like, there's a lot of fear that comes with a blank sheet of paper, um, which I imagine everybody in this call can can relate to. But for my first session with somebody or a group, I might bring collage instead. So it's just picking out words, and that's why I also bring directives, so it feels very attainable. It's not draw me a picture today. It's, hey, let's think about a stressful time today, and let's just like scribble this paper, and then we're going to rip it up. Everybody can scribble. Everybody can choose imagery out of a bag of cut collage pieces. So that's kind of where I take it. I also remind people it's about the product. I mean, the process and not the product. And that, I think that is the same for music therapy. My music therapists love to do a self-care group with our team, and cannot carry a tune. Even like when we're banging on the drum, I'm so out of key, or I don't even know what the words are. So I think that, but once you get into it, and I think also group work is really amazing in that you see your neighbor kind of messing up and having fun with it. So you kind of get into it as well. And at the end of it, I'm laughing and having the best time. And I'm also taking care of myself. And it feels really good to bang on a drum. So there's those little things that just kind of um, help support that fear. Um, but yeah, I think everybody's also different. So, humor might work for somebody, or, just putting the materials down and walking away. Eventually they're going to pick them up. So, you never know. Everybody's so different, but just again, um, yeah, just seeing what works.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming down to seeing what works, we did get a question about advocacy. And advocacy is, all-encompassing. You can advocate for anything. But with this being specific to the arts and arts therapy, and with health and healing being at the forefront, really as that tying model between arts and STEM, what are ways that we could advocate for more work like this, either in health spaces or in our community? And like going down to that blank sheet of paper, where should people start with that advocacy?
It's a great question. Um, I think that, I mean, convincing people that creativity is part of whole person care, I think is what it boils down to. There's also, again, a ton of research out there. So I think that always helps. In my shop, that's what I do. I present the data, or storytelling is also very important. So what you said about the program up in the upstate that has those resources, like taking something that's already been done, and why reinvent the wheel if someone's giving you all this data and information to start something that's there, you can advocate for it to be in your space. I also think the arts are seen as extra, but they really, I think, have a place everywhere, which again, I think it takes time. I also think partnering with organization is a great way to advocate for it. Again, our partnership with the South Carolina Arts Commission has been invaluable. Dale and I met over the directory. So there's so many different ways to advocate for it being in an organization that you might work with, or taking it to someone to start something. I also think, so partnerships, I think starting small, piloting something small, and then showing impact. So like I talked about with our school-based program, we started off with 5 schools in Charleston County, and we collected a ton of data. And then I published a paper on the acceptability and feasibility of doing that in South Carolina schools. So, that is a way that I've advocated for creative arts therapies in our work, is that I've had to show that it works, and then that there's impact, and then we're able to build from there. So although it's taking some time, I think it's really meaningful to tell those stories and show the impact that way. And then I won't even go down we're also advocating for licensure in the state for all of these creative arts therapy professions. We'll get there. There's about 14 states in the country that have an art therapy license, so they can be a billable service, hopefully one day. So they're just like, you can reach out to an art therapist just as easily as reaching out to a verbal talk therapist and getting your insurance to cover it. That is the dream one day. And we're slowly getting there, but yeah, I think licensure advocacy and title protection is also something that we're working towards in my world right now as well. I know music therapy has been working on it for a very, very long time as well in our state. Dale, any advocacy options on your end?
Well, historically, drama therapists are like 10 years behind the other expressive arts therapists. So I think that maybe we're licensed in New York State, maybe California, maybe there was a push in New Jersey that may have actually worked. It's going to be a long time before the South accepts legitimate. I guess the advocacy piece for me came when I realized that all the stuff I was doing was so ephemeral, especially the drama therapy. It happens and then it's gone. So that's why I pushed to create books of writing and art that people were doing, so that they could continue to be used in those populations, like the juvenile books and things like that. And then the Arts Commission helped fund a book by the Spectrum Theater Group called The Masks We Wear, where they've really put themselves out through their writing and art about what it's like to be on the spectrum. And wearing a mask, as one of them said, is so exhausting. So that book, we continue to use that book, and it's been an artifact that I could send around and say, people on the spectrum may not express themselves the way you're used to people expressing themselves, but there's a lot going on in their imagination and their creativity. And just look at this book. The most recent one is a book that the Junior League funded called The Art of the After, which is writing and art by survivors of sexual exploitation. Predominantly the women at Jasmine Road and Serenity Place created that book. And now it's going into clinical spaces where people can use it as a way of saying, do you see yourself in this art or this poetry that this person wrote? And then that book has a place for the reader to journal or respond through art or writing to each individual piece of art in it. So that's kind of a next step to try to advocate for the kind of work that we do, I guess.
It's
I think
amazing being
another
able
piece.
to tie it in. Oh, I'm so sorry, Katie.
Go ahead, Hailey.
Oh, I think that it's great that you're giving that space in the book for people to reflect on what they just saw too, instead of, viewing it, having it be a permanent space for it, but also somewhat an ephemeral piece where you're experiencing it and like maybe you don't fully process it the first time around, but then you're like, okay, what are these guiding questions? How did I feel when I was reading it? Did I identify with that? And a lot of advocacy from what I've seen is people knowing that things like this exist and that drama therapy, art therapy, music therapy are options for people to use. It's not, like you said, Katie, a licensed thing in South Carolina right now where people can just easily reach out to these therapists. But knowing that it exists, I think, is really the first step, and being able to share those stories is really fantastic. I'm so sorry I cut you off earlier. Katie, what were you going to share?
I think also creative arts therapists advocating for their profession. I feel like there's also a lot of art therapists in our state too that are maybe not trained. So also just I think the education piece is also really important to notate what constitutes art therapy and what constitutes art as therapy or drama as therapy versus drama therapy. I think, having that training and ensuring that credentialed providers are doing the work. So if you're looking for an art therapist in your organization, make sure you're looking for a credentialed professional and not someone that just says that they do arts in the wellness space, which is just as important, but I think the goals are very different. So I'm just throwing that out there as well. Especially with advocating for licensure, there has to just be a clear delineation between all the wonderful work that's happening in our communities as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know we're getting towards the end of our time, so if anybody in the chat would like to drop a question, you're welcome to. Probably should have said that a little bit earlier. But while we wait on a question to come through, if Dale and Katie, you want to share a little bit about what's coming up or something that maybe you didn't get the opportunity to share earlier that you're really interested in.
Well, there's an art therapist in the upstate named Courtney Chandler, and she and I get to work together on a lot of things. Yeah. And we're partnering on two things in the summer. One is a training for counselors in the Pickens County School District to learn about art therapy, not to become art therapists, but and part of the grant provides materials for them to have in their offices. So when kids come in, rather than the staring and saying, "How do you feel today?" They have materials and some simple things they can do to get the kids drawing or sculpting or something so that whatever needs to be talked about can be talked about without it becoming therapy. And then every summer I work with refugees from Afghanistan and Africa. They are settled in the Clemson area by, I think it's a Lutheran organization. So we'll do some mornings with teens and then mornings with the moms. And this year, the moms and Courtney is going to be central to this. We'll create quilts, patterns for quilts that they can eventually sell, but will also along the way be a real therapeutic exercise for them.
That's
That's
incredible.
amazing.
I'm really excited to share that MUSC has officially gotten the green light go to build a counseling and art therapy program here. So come January 2028, we will have our first cohort of art therapy students. And this is the first graduate training program across the 5-state radius for art therapists to get their training. Whereas I had to ship myself off to another state, people can do this in their communities here in the state. Just so exciting. It's also an online program, so you don't have to live in Charleston to do it. There's a hopefully there'll be like 1 or 2 week intensive. But we are very, very excited. And we are beginning the accreditation process now. So TBD, but that is really exciting for our state to have a space for art therapists. And if you're interested in music therapy, there's a program at Charleston Southern University in our state. So creative arts therapy is all around. And then, yeah, if there's also anybody who is interested in developing some kind of partnership with MUSC, we're across the entire state. So please reach out to us if you are interested in partnering or just talking through anything. But Dale, is that program for counselors? Is it just in that district or is it statewide or?
It's just in Pickens County, the United Way, Pickens County United Way funded just to 6 hours of continuing it for them.
Wow.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, and then we have open availability for school districts as well for MUSC Arts and Healing school-based programming as well.
That's awesome. Thank you all both for sharing all that great information and making sure people know how to get in contact with all the opportunities that we have in the state, whether they're in the upstate, low country, somewhere in the middle. It's really, really great to have these opportunities for people and to continue creative arts therapy for people everywhere. I'd just like to thank y'all both again for being here and taking the time to talk with us about arts therapy, how it's impacted y'all's communities. And for those of you who are, oh, wait, do we have? Let me share more information about that program. We can share information about the programs in our in the email that I'll send you, just so that y'all can have it to reference in the future. Definitely want to make sure this is information that's accessible to y'all. There will also be a recording of this creative conversation available on YouTube and our website. So if you're interested on looking back on this, taking a little bit of notes, feel free to definitely do that. Also in the survey, in the email, there will be a survey about this creative conversation. This is the first year that we've done this. I'm trying to get as much feedback as possible. So if y'all would be so kind to fill that out. Our new creative conversations for FY27 will be listed sometime this summer. So if you have any questions about the upcoming creative conversations, which will next year include some professional development opportunities, please reach out to me and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Yeah, Katie and Dale, thank you so much for being here today.
So much.
Yes, we'll see you next time. I'll be in touch soon.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.